So hey everybody, so I want to do the intro. This is the first long form measure of maps. I found this really cool map that sort of explains the timeline from 1776 to 1853 of the progression of land grab or land purchases through war or through bartering or whatever it might be, purchasing and whatnot. From the original 13 colonies and that land through till the Gadsden Purchase in 1853. It really is, especially in the presidency of James K. Polk from 1845 to 1849, where basically about half the continental U.S. was grabbed through, most of it through war, one through the threat of war, and then one small purchase. Uh, really changed the outlook in the future of this North American continent, of what would be the future going forward and what would eventually become this extremely strong nation. And even, looking at it, the last purchase in 1853, you know, 7 years later, you're looking at, 8 years later, you're looking at the Civil War where this nation is split down the middle over several different reasons and somehow survives that, reunites, becomes truly the United States of America, and ultimately becomes what we are today. But it is interesting looking at maps and seeing how these different areas came into being and the years that they did. Maybe a little bit of the reasoning behind it. I originally was going to do this as a short, but just splitting the map, the original full map, into sections so you can sort of see those sections up a little bit closer up. I just thought it was ultimately, I'm long-winded. Let's be honest. Wound up being a long form video, but I always have found maps intriguing. So I hope you enjoy this and what's to come, and then I'll have a little bit of a finish up at the end. Hey everybody, so we're starting in 1776 when the colonies declared their Declaration of Independence. You'll see in this map here where the colonies basically originally were. Now, in the north, you look at Maine, which was a territory at the time, and some of these areas around New York and the New England states. Some of these were not fully defined until after the Revolution, sort of the separation line between British Canada and the new United States. Also to the south, you'll see Florida. That at that time would have been a Spanish territory. So it wasn't till 1810, I think, till 1819 that the Florida Purchase happened. Also, a part of that purchase was probably like the southern tips of maybe a little bit of Mississippi, a little bit of Alabama, a little bit of Georgia. But these areas of the colonies, as we've talked about before, the British government did not want the crown, did not want the colonies to go really beyond the Appalachian or the Allegheny Mountains, simply because the line between French claims and British claims was really, really undefined. The French and Indian War was about a lot of that. Um, and just because of the fur trade, the timber trade, these, you know, areas, this was the best definition they would have had at that stage of just not trying to be at constant war, if you will. And this will take us to the second area. So, this second area, this is what I guess is known as sort of the Western Cessations. This would have happened about 1783, and this was sort of that middle ground. Not necessarily no man lands, probably more French claim than British claim, but this is the area they sort of wanted everybody to stay out of. It would become the future Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, sort of over to, I believe, the Mississippi. And so this land was then claimed by the new American nation, like I said, around 1783. So it would have all just been territory at that stage. And once again, I will reiterate with this. I think I've said it already, and then again later in the video. how the land was claimed and stuff like that. This is not what this video is about. It's my basic love of maps. My parents used to get National Geographic, so maps came with that, and it's just interesting to me to see how from 1776 to 1853, America went from coast to coast in the land claims. Some via war, some purchases. I think there was three purchases there. Even the colonial, what would become those states, the original 13 colonies, a lot of land was purchased, but there was also not everything was above board. And clearly, with some of the wars that happened, the threats, it is what it is. This is not a political statement. It's not agenda driven. It's just a matter of the measure of maps, looking at maps over time, how America grew. Here is our third area. This is the Louisiana Purchase, 1803 by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was very much ran on small government, small government, small government. Actually wound up leading quite a big government, and a lot of people question at the time and even today, was it actually constitutional for him to make this purchase? It, really, to that point, especially in the modern age, was the greatest land purchase. Pennies on the dollar for what this land was actually worth until the Alaska purchase from Russia, which was also another one. It's pennies on the dollars, and it's probably the even greater purchase of land at that stage. Uh, it was one of those things. The French needed money, and they sold the land. They didn't have an interest in being involved with the New World anymore, and Thomas Jefferson took advantage of that, and it really was a good purchase. This would lead to the Lewis and Clark expedition. Mainly, it's finding out what we bought, but also they wanted to see if they could find a passage to the Pacific Ocean because they were really unsure of how much further away was it from what they purchased. And this would lead to the Oregon Territory, what would become the Oregon Trail, um, and really this world-renowned expedition that ultimately was successful, as difficult as it was. And this was the Louisiana Purchase. So this is where you start getting into some of the questionable stuff. Uh, Texas, this area here, would have all been Mexico territory. Originally Spanish, and when Mexico had their rebellion, obviously became the Mexican Empire, if you will. Uh, they had opened the land up that was known as Texas to people, whoever wanted to come. And it seemed like a good idea at the time because the idea was to get people in to, develop the land and all that other kind of stuff. And they felt like this would be beneficial to them. Ultimately, a lot of Americans came there and ultimately decided they didn't like being underneath the Mexican rule and decided to rebel. And this is what led to the Alamo, the lead of the rebellion by Sam Houston, and ultimately Texas winning its freedom, 1845. It's also important to note at this time, James K. Polk became president. He promised how he got elected is he promised that he would only run for one term, 4-year term. He was president from 1845 to 1849, and this was the start with this Texas rebellion of really the largest land grab. Uh, Probably almost about half the nation of what we know today as the continental United States would happen within just a couple years during his presidency. And this was the beginning. Remember the Alamo. So this next area, which is the Oregon territory or country, it's basically Washington State, Oregon State, and Idaho, probably a little bit more, but that may very well be all of it. This was actually, I don't know if you want to call it a bluff, but Polk basically said to England, we're willing to go to war over this territory. We want our land to continue to follow this parallel line. We want all of that. And basically threw that on them. It's war or you give us the land. And ultimately, England's like, we don't want to be dealing with you guys anymore. And ultimately just sent that land over. And this was another one of those parts of the land grab that happened in 1846, a year later after Texas had wind out had in its rebellion. So here's where it gets real iffy. California, this whole area that you're seeing here, and I guess it's yellow because I'm colorblind. This was all once again part of Mexico's empire, and basically they had learned their lessons from the Texas debacle, and they had one of the guys that was an important figure in this was John Sutter, who we talked about. He sort of made a deal with Mexico that he would watch over the territory, but not to let too many foreigners in. He just never intended to follow that, so he started letting all kinds of people in, and obviously the gold rush really, really changed things because it started on his property. But this was the Mexican American War, and it just ultimately we won. America won, and Mexico wound up having to secede this land uh, to the United States, and this is where truly it was sea to shining sea. But it was a lot of brutal conduct that happened in this war, and then thereafter in California, like we talked about with John Sutter. A lot of the native tribes that were in this area were very peaceable and unarmed. They just wanted to live their lives, and they really were enslaved. And nobody to this day really knows. I mean, maybe it was 10,000, 15,000, maybe 150,000. It's much more likely towards the higher number of native peoples that were murdered. And John Sutter was a major part of that. So this is one of those things where it's certainly a blight on our history, much like slavery. And you can argue these different things however you want to, but it really, at the end of the day, history is history. It's warts and all. And unfortunately, throughout the history of man, humanity, you have always seen the victor or the conqueror. They write history, they get the spoils. You get defeated, and that goes, with North America, it goes before the white settlers ever came here. The native tribes that were here would fight each other, and if you got defeated, you were enslaved, and your lands went to the victor. And they sort of beat up on each other quite a bit before the white settlers got here, and ultimately probably led to their demise because they weren't strong enough anymore as they had been hundreds of years prior, where their numbers would have just been way too high for this to ever have happened in the way that it did. But it's just sort of how history happened, and you look anywhere in the world, you're going to see these same type of things. It's unfortunate. It's part of the humanity, the evil of man that these things happen. But this is just the maps showing where this happened, and this is 1848, right before James K. Polk in 1849 would have left the presidency. So he did and accomplished everything he said he was going to in his 4 years. It also pretty much killed him because I think he only lasted like 6 months after he was done with the presidency and he passed away. He was a pretty young guy yet. It aged him extraordinarily. And but this is the thing that James K. Polk is probably most well known for is the expansion of land, probably almost half of our land in the continental United States. So this last little bit, I really don't know a whole lot about other than the Gadsden Purchase, as you can look at it here, is sort of the southern tips of New Mexico and Arizona. This was purchased in 1853 and was the finality of the continental land being bought, warred over, or purchased. They're taken, however you want to put it. But this was the last little piece that would happen in this growth over a period, 1776 to 1853, less than 80 years for the country to expand to that degree is really an impressive because it's such a large expanse of land. So this measure of maps. I find maps interesting, and I thought it was just how it was color coded and it showed the different areas and then their dates. It sort of puts things in perspective of when this land all happened. And I thought it would make for a really good video. And I hope you enjoyed. There's a little bit yet here that I talk about yet hereafter. So I hope you enjoyed this. We can argue all kinds of points because, I mean, clearly if we're honest, the way the land was taken, clearly, but starting with the colonies, the native peoples that were here, the land primarily was stolen. And you can look at, even, looking back at what was, happened later during James K. Polk's presidency. We went, Texas went for their independence. In essence, California went for their independence as well. But in reality, there were a number of people that knew what they were doing and sort of went in there and made these land grabs. And, it's history is written by the conquerors, and that's just sort of the reality of it. But this video is not to present any kind of political message or agenda. It's just sort of saying this is the map and how it formulated over a period of less than 80 years. And it's sort of impressive how that map came together, and these different territories. You can look and see where the states are today and stuff like that, and just sort of, that's when that land would have become part of what would be the United States. So as always, I want to say thanks for coming along on another journey. This was just one of those videos that sort of was never intended to be long form, but turned out that way. And it's just, I thought it was pretty cool. Just looking at the maps, I always love anything map related. From my days as a kid, National Geographic used to send along these maps. I used to love looking at these maps and seeing where things are located, and the geography of it, the topographical features, and all that kind of stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And as always, we'll see you all about town.